For one Christmas floral pick, you should have 3 pine needle stems, and they should be assembled on the longer stems. You should have 1 miniature pine cone, 1 berry spray, and then 1 of the white cedar stems, and that should also be assembled on a longer 18 gauge stem wire. You will also need a 16 gauge stem wire, and I've already wrapped mine with floral tape just to prepare the surface and get it ready for assembly. Putting the floral tape on there like this gives a little bit more grip so your components don't slip around as much. I'm going to be assembling mine just using floral tape, but if you're having a hard time getting any of these pieces to stay on this wire without wiggling around, I would recommend that you use a very thin gauge wire, like a 28 gauge or a 30 gauge, to bind the component to the stem wire first and then go over it with floral tape to cover the wires. So that wire will give you a little bit extra grip if you're having a hard time, but do try it with just the floral tape first. It's a little bit easier with just the floral tape. Now I'm going to stretch the end of my floral tape to activate the stickies. And I'm going to start right at the end of my branch with one of the needles, one of the pine needles. So I'm just going to wrap the floral tape right around there at the top and stick it to itself on the other side. And then I'm going to wrap down a little ways, not too far. About right there, that's a little less than an inch, about 3/4 of an inch there, right below my pine needles. And then I'm going to add in the next component. On this one, maybe I'll do the cedar branch on this one next. Now you can add them in any order. It's not a big deal. If you're making a bunch of different stems, I do recommend that you do them a little bit different each time that you put them together. So then we're just going to continue wrapping with the floral tape. And then let's see, I'm going to do my berries next. I'm only wrapping down about 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch below each of these little components. Otherwise, the finished spray will look a little bit more airy. And if you put them really close together, it's going to look really compact. It'll be a much shorter stem. So I'm going to add in my berries there and continue wrapping down just a little ways. And next I'm going to add in another pine needle spray. I'm going to put that over here. And just continue wrapping down. Make sure you're stretching the floral tape and then wrapping. Wrap down a little ways. And let's do the pine cone next, right over here. I'm adding my stems where they're going to help round out the stem. So if I put it over here on this side, it's going to make it a little bit wider over here. But if I put it kind of on top right there, it helps to round out my stem just a little bit better. I'm going to wrap down just a little ways, and then I've got one more little pine needle spray that I'm going to add right over here. And as you're wrapping down, also make sure that all these little individual stem wires here are staying straight and they're not twisting around each other. Twisting is going to create extra lumps in your stem. So make sure that they are staying nice and straight where they're supposed to. Now after I've got the last component added, I'm just going to continue wrapping down all the way to the bottom with my floral tape. I'm going to stop right about there, and then I've got these big wire cutters that'll cut through multiple stems at the same time. You might need to trim them individually if you don't have these heavy-duty wire cutters. So I'm just going to clip them so that they all end in the same spot. And the finished Christmas floral pick looks something like this. Now I designed these to be fairly small. You can, of course, customize the size. You can add more components to it. You can add maybe a second branch shooting off the side with more components on that. So you can play around with this design. You can also make it shorter, like this one. I think the finished length here of the floral part itself is about 3.5, 4 inches long. Yeah, about 4 inches long there. If you needed it shorter, you can accomplish that just by wrapping less space between each of your components before you add them on. You can make it a little bit longer, though there would be more space between each of your components. So if that's what you're looking for your arrangement, you can spread those pieces out just by wrapping further down before you add in the next component. Now these floral picks can be used in a variety of ways. You can put it in a vase or a potted arrangement. You can add them to a wreath or a garland. You can also just stick them right into your Christmas tree and have them sit on top of your branch. Now, the silk flowers that people use for inserting into their Christmas tree are very lightweight. These being made out of beads and wire are a little bit heavier. So I wouldn't go too much larger than this if you're going to put it on a Christmas tree. You might also want to use little clips to help clip it down to the branch so that they don't fall out every time someone knocks into your tree. Now, let's talk about stem length here. I recommended for these floral picks that you start with a longer stem. If you're putting this in a Christmas tree or a vase, that'll give you a little bit of flexibility as to how far it needs to go into the Christmas tree or into the vase, how far it's going to stick up out of the vase or the pot. So you start with the longer stem and then trim it if you need it to be a little bit shorter. That gives you flexibility with your length. Now, if you're using this little floral pick in a wreath or a garland, you probably don't need that much stem length. You could probably be about right there, about half the length that I've got right now. Okay, so keep it long until you know what you're doing with it, and then trim it as you're adding to your piece so you know how much stem wire you need. For one candle ring, you should have 18 pine needle stems on shorter 18 gauge stem wires, 6 miniature pine cones, 6 berry stems, 6 white cedar stems. You will also need a 4-inch diameter metal macrame hoop. Mine is already wrapped with floral tape, which I'll show you how to do here in just a second. And you will need some brown floral tape. Now, optionally, you may also want a thin gauge wire like a 28 or 26 gauge wire if you're having any trouble getting the floral tape to assemble the pieces onto your ring. To start off the assembly of my candle ring, I'm going to be wrapping my little macrame hoop with floral tape to prepare the surface and make it a little bit less slippery. Now, to wrap a hoop, it is easier to do if you actually cut the floral tape off of your roll. So I'm going to remove that. And then it's wrapped very similar to how you would a stem wire. We're just going to stretch the end, stick it to itself on the other side. The only difference is it goes a little bit slower because you got to pull the whole length of the floral tape through while you're wrapping around. And you will just continue this all the way until you get back to the beginning. Okay, now when I was designing this, I figured how many pieces I needed to make by first finding the circumference of my candle ring base, which is a 4-inch macrame hoop. That ended up being 12 inches there. And I did a little mock assembly of a single stem and was able to find that the components for one single floral pick, which should be 3 pine needle stems, 1 miniature pine cone, 1 berry spray, and then 1 of the white cedar stems, all of that needs about 2 inches of stem length to attach it securely there. So all of those components can fit within 2 inches of this little candle ring. And then I multiplied, so 12 divided by 2 inches, 6. So I made enough components for 6 floral picks. So my goal while I'm assembling this is to get all 6 of these little stems to fit within a 2-inch space. That should give me enough coverage on my candle ring so I've got a nice full looking candle ring, and make sure that I use all of the components that I've made. Now, just like wrapping the hoop with floral tape first, we do need to remove a length of the floral tape, and you don't need to remove the full length at once. We can just add in more floral tape later as we need it. So I'm just going to cut a little bit here, it's a little over a foot there that I've cut, a little bit easier length to manage. I'm going to stretch the end of my floral tape to activate the stickies, and then I'm going to pick my first component. I'm going to use a pine needle thing. And I'm going to put it on the outside edge of my hoop, either the outside or the top side of the hoop. I do not want to add it on the inner side of the hoop or on the bottom. I want the bottom of my candle ring to be perfectly flat when I'm done, or as close to flat as I can get it. So I want all of my stems to be added on the outside or on the top of my little hoop. So I'm going to bend this out. I want my needle sprays to stick out a little bit from my stem. And you may need to also mold the little individual stem wires to fit around your hoop. All right, so I'm going to attach this right there, and I'm going to wrap down just a little ways. Remember, I'm trying to get all of these little components within 2 inches of the outside. So I'm just going to wrap down a little ways there, and I'm going to add in my next component. Let's do the cedar leaf this time. I'm going to add that one there. And this time I'm going right on top of the ring, just so I can get the components to fit together nicely. I'm going to mold my stem right around the outside of the ring and continue wrapping. I'm just going to wrap a few times, and then I'm going to add in my next component. Let's do my pine cone. Right there, I'm adding that to the outside-ish, a little bit on top of the little ring. And I'm going to continue wrapping. Remember to stretch your tape as you're going. That's what activates the stickies. If you don't stretch it, it is not going to stick. So I'm just going to wrap a few times there. And then I'm going to add in another pine cone or pine needle thing right there. So from the front side where I'm going to be viewing my candle ring, it's going to look like this, nice and full. And from the top, it'll look something like this. All right, keep wrapping that floral tape. Now, what I usually do for wreaths like this is I make a pre-layout. I lay out all my pieces on top of my ring. I'm just kind of going for it this time. But if it helps you with your spacing to lay all your pieces out on top of your ring to get kind of an idea of where you want everything to go, you can do that and then just move your pieces over to the side and pick them up one by one as you go around the ring. You can definitely do that. That's what I've done with candle rings and wreaths in the past. All right, let's do the berries right there. And then I'm going to continue wrapping. And just like the floral picks, if you're having a really hard time getting your pieces to stay where you've put them, you definitely can use wire to attach these pieces first and then go over it with floral tape. It is a little bit harder that way to try and get the floral tape between all the little pieces after you've wrapped it with wire, but it definitely can be done. All right, now my floral tape is almost done, so I'm just going to go ahead and wrap down as far as I can with this floral tape. And that's all the components for one little segment, that one little 2-inch segment that I was hoping for. And it looks like I've succeeded in about 2 inches there. Okay. So there's my first little segment. So I've gotten pretty close to my 2-inch goal here. I'm just about like 1/4 of an inch off there. So I'm going to make sure that my next little segment is stretched out a little bit further. So I'm going to remove somewhere a foot or 2 of my floral tape off of my little roll. And I'm going to gather the components for the next little segment. And again, it's the same as one floral pick. So there should be 3 pine needles, 1 pine cone, a cedar stem, and a berry stem. All right, so I'm going to add this pine needle right down here. I've skipped a little bit of space there. I'm looking at the front of my candle ring and making sure that I've gotten pretty good coverage. So I don't really want any of my ring to show through between my pieces, or maybe just a very little bit of the ring showing through, if at all. All right, so now I'm going to go with my first little pine needle attached there. So I'm going to attach a new length of floral tape. And I'm going to wrap down a little ways. Okay, I'm going to do my little cedar right there. Okay, so check the front again, make sure you're getting pretty decent coverage. Okay, and I'm going to add in, let's do a pine cone next. I'm going to put my pine cone, my first pine cone is kind of pointing up a little bit, so this one I'm going to switch it and make it go more outward. I don't want it to look exactly the same, the full length around. Okay, I'm going to add in another pine needle, and let's do this. This one's a little bit shorter. I'm going to put it in the front, and these ones that are going kind of along the bottom, make sure that they're pointing out and not down, because again, we want our candle ring to be able to sit flat. So make sure it's coming out so it'll point away from the candle. Let's see, I need to fill in some space here, so I'm going to add my pine needle next. Right there, to help fill in that little spot above the pine cone. Okay, and then for the last piece, I'll add in these little berries. Make sure that they're not overlapping that pine cone too much. I want everything to show nicely. And then add those in. And I'm going to finish off this floral tape. I'll try and cover these stems as much as I can. That'll just give me a smoother surface to assemble on for my next little segment. Alright, so there's the first two little segments of my ring, and I've covered a good almost 4 inches there, a little tiny bit less. Let me double check that. So yeah, I've covered just about, I have covered it 4 inches there with my little components, which was my goal there for 2 segments. So I'm going to continue all the way around my ring, adding in the segments for one little floral pick every 2 inches. So I'm going to go continue doing that off screen, and then when I get closer to the end, I'm going to come back and show you guys the last little pieces so that I can show you how to finish it off at the end. Alright, so I'm up to the last segment here, and I'm very encouraged that I've got about a 2-inch little space there to cover, because that's how much I planned on for each segment. So yay, my math seems like it's working out pretty well. Alright, now again I'm going to cut just a couple feet of this floral tape off of my roll. Now we've got a situation here right at the end where our stem wires, I even had some in the second to last segment, I had to kind of put my stem wires here along the outside of this first segment, just because they're going to have to overlap a little bit, so I have long enough stems on my components to be able to attach them. Now this means we're going to have to wrap the floral tape between each of the little components. So to get started, I'm going to bend all of these back out of the way so I have a little bit more room to work for now. And I'm going to continue adding on my stems like normal. So I'm going to attach my floral tape here. And this stem I'm going to put above, so I'm going to make sure it overlaps above instead of kind of twisting around the stem and going below. So this one's going to go above. I'm going to kind of, I don't know if you're going to be able to see very well there, but I've kind of fitted this stem around right on top of the ring, right underneath all the first little segments components. I can trim it just a little bit. I don't need a very long length of stem wire for these pieces. So I can go through here with my nifty wire cutters, being very careful. I'm only cutting the stem wire. And I can cut that as long as I have about 2 or so inches of stem wire there, I'm gonna be okay. So don't cut it shorter than 2 inches. And then once I get all the pieces on, I'll show you how to go through all the little pieces. So, okay, we're gonna do that, and then we're gonna do, let's do a pine needle coming forward right there. The more pieces you get on there, the harder it is to hold everything. And so this one, because I'm putting it on the outside, I'm kind of layering that stem wire down there. But I am trying to be very careful that it doesn't go on the bottom of my ring. I'm kind of layering it right on the outside there. Because again, I want the bottom of my ring to be pretty flat. Alright, so I'm going to wrap that. And then let's do the, what should we do next? Let's do this thing. Cedar. Grabbed a little loop there, get that out of the way. This one I think is probably going to have to go down below the ring. I can trim all those stems a little bit later as I get closer to having to cover over that. Then I'm just going to add the pine cone. This one, shoot, this one's probably going to have to go down below too. Alright, so I'm going to make sure my last two components go up above the ring. Okay, broke my floral tape, so I'm just going to reattach it. Right there. Now be nice with your little cedar stems. They are on delicate wires, so be nice when you handle those ones. Okay, let's do the berries next, and then I've got one last pine needle spray. And remember, I moved some of these over so that I could get in here. I'm kind of wondering if I've left enough space for this last segment. It should be okay. I'll make these berries go up. Oh, and I want to lay that stem wire on the top of the ring. So I'm layering that one inside my ring there, right on top. Okay, so this last little pine thing I'm going to put right up there in that last little spot that I've got. Now this is where it gets hard because I got to get my floral tape between all my pieces, but there's not really very much space. So kind of tilt your floral tape sideways, go down between everything, and then continue as normal. And I'm going to get this little pine needle stem up on top of that ring. Okay, so I'm going to do that again. Go find out which needles belong to which segment and go around and kind of wiggle it down. And you don't want to pull too hard on your floral tape when you're doing this because then you're going to rip it. Okay, so again I'm going to go in that same-ish spot right there between those components. That needle spray goes up. Okay. Alright, I'm going to flip this over for a minute so you can see the bottom of my ring. As you can see, I've got all these little stem wires here from this last segment that I got to wrap over. But I am going to trim them so I don't have to wrap quite so far because they're feeling pretty secure already. So I'm going to trim these a little bit shorter than they are right now. Again, making sure that I'm not cutting anything shorter than 2 inches so that I have enough support for each individual component. Alright, and then I'm going to have to wrap between components. So this one is I'm going to move these out of the way as I've wrapped between those a few times. So now I'm going to pull up this little spacing here, right there, and I'm going to try and get my floral tape between these pieces now. I do want to try to fully cover all these little stem wires down at the bottom. Just makes it look nicer. But if you do have a gap between some, it's not going to be a huge deal as far as security wise. It's just not going to be the prettiest if you have a gap visible. So move those components out of the way, and I'm going to try to wrap between these ones next. So very carefully move those out of the way. Get your floral tape through there. And wrap. And one more time, and my floral tape is not staying flat as I'm doing this. It's kind of bunching up a little bit, and generally that's okay for the most part. As long as it's flat in some areas that you're wrapping on, it should be okay. So I'm going to try and wrap above those little berries. So I'm going to move these pine needles out of the way and go down between. Okay, so I'm going to add in a new length of floral tape just to finish this off. So I ran out. So I've got to try and get it between these little components, stretch it, and then stick it to itself on the other side. This is a really awkward thing to do on video, guys, so I'm sorry if I'm going off screen a little bit here. So kind of hold down that end. Sometimes it tries to come up and come off, so if you kind of hold it down with one finger while you wrap a couple more times, that should help secure it in place. Now all these little places where there's floral tape there, you can rub that to try and help smooth it out if it's not the smoothest, because my floral tape is not staying flat as I'm going through. Let's see, let's get between these two pine needles. So I'm going to move these out of the way and get through. Now you could use something like yarn instead of all this floral tape, or even ribbon. I might end up sealing this floral tape with an acrylic just to protect it and keep it good for a little bit longer. This floral tape is made out of some kind of paper, and over time it might get a little bit beat up. Alright, well, there I have finished all of my wrapping. And you can kind of go along the underside and you can kind of rub it, which will help smooth it out and help stick it down if there's any parts that didn't completely get stuck down. And you can do that on the top and the inside of your ring as well. Alright, then you go through and you kind of reshape things. Often during assembly things get a little bit mangled and bonked around, and they just need a little bit of attention afterwards to go through and take a look. I'm sure I'll find more after this is sitting on my shelf for a little while. More things that I need to straighten back out. Like these needles got a little bit bendy. I'm going to go through and re-straighten those. I'm going to try and pull them back out. Some of them got a little bit squished in against the stem, so I'm going to pull some of those back out so I get a little bit more volume with my little pine needles. Alright, so there is my finished candle ring, and that should fit right around a little 3-inch candle, like so.